This is my favorite scene in one battle after another. It's the moment when 2 hours in, Willa, teenage daughter of revolutionaries, finally meets the story's villain, but we realize that she's confronting something even bigger and scarier than the bad guy. The question of whether her life story, as she has always known it, is a lie, and what she will do when she finds out.
Come closer.
Movies often have a scene that, if you know how to read it, sums up the story and what it means. Up until this point, the movie, which by the way we are going to spoil, has made us think that it's the story of Willa's mother or her father. But listen to Paul Thomas Anderson, the movie's director.
I loved the roll of the dice for like setting up a movie where you think, okay, here's our lead character. You know, this is a movie about her. He's maybe a supporting part, but it's really all just prologue for this girl's story.
This is the moment we realize that the entire movie has been about how she got to this moment when the bad guy surprises her with a DNA test. Before this, the movie made us think that it was about revolutionaries fighting for change in her mom's section, or about surviving under fascism in her dad's. But actually it was all set up for Willa learning that this great villain is her father and the dilemma that she faces over what to do in response. This scene is telling us that the central conflict of the movie is this girl inheriting a struggle that her parents started and that she will now need to navigate.
What happens when the sins of these two parents are sort of dumped into this girl's lap?
Well, three parents, right?
Uh-oh.
And these characters and their conflicts are all stand-ins for a larger story about America, what it's become. Willa is our future, her mom and her dad and our other dad represent the past or the present that brought us here. And it turns this movie into something much more interesting than heroes versus villains. It's a story about what it means to suddenly confront who and what we are as a society, to come face to face with that truth and have to decide what we do with that. So look, this is a news show. Why are we talking about a movie? It's because I believe that movies matter. Movies aren't just a reflection of our world, they shape it. They influence how we think about and navigate everything, our politics, our history, our obligations to society and one another, what we want from life, how we go about getting it. They reveal big truths about our world and help us think through big questions about how to live in it. That is especially true of this movie, which, if you know how to listen, has a lot to say about surviving and finding meaning in an America that can feel pretty dark these days. We are going to try to unlock what this movie is saying, how it's saying it, and what that means for understanding our world. And like a lot of movies, a lot of this gets communicated in the ending. But to work our way up to that, this is a movie that conveys its ideas through its characters. So that's where we're going to start. And the very first one we meet is Perfidia, Willa's mother, who sort of represents our recent, more hopeful past. It's a little more complicated, which we'll get into, but just take that as a starting point. Anyway, one way you can tell that last scene we just saw was important is that it uses the exact same music as the opening scene with Perfidia. 2 hours later, when Willa confronts the villain, the movie wants us to remember back to this moment. Perfidia confronting the detention camp. This sort of musical echo, it's one of the tricks that movies use to tell you what they're about. And this is telling us that Willa inherits her mom's fight and that they are fighting the same larger thing. And we'll come back to what that is. In this very next scene, we learn about Perfidia, that she's in charge.
We got a plan for us.
That she's fighter for an actual no-bull
revolution.
And then she gets a sexual thrill from it. And it's those traits that set Perfidia on the journey that will define her. It comes in that first scene when they raid the camp. She meets the story's villain.
I'm Captain Stephen J. Lockjaw.
She sexually humiliates him in a way that we can't show here.
Not on your feet.
So their mutual surprise, they both love it. Some people took this as a character flaw on her part or as coming out of nowhere, but to me, it made a lot of sense. It's because each hates what the other stands for that they get this thrill from playing a game of taboo role reversal that changes the course of both of their lives. But to the extent that Perfidia represents hopeful aspects of our past, like the fight for progress, she is also burdened by that past. And that all makes a lot more sense when you see how their relationship is drawing on a couple of very long-running ideas in American storytelling. Like this book Herman Melville wrote in 1855 that still gets adapted a bunch, like this movie version. It's about a slaver and a slave revolt leader whose fight becomes this kind of embrace. He looks like he's hugging the slaver here, but we know he is actually holding him hostage. It's a metaphor for the way that oppressor and oppressed become intertwined, that their conflict becomes a kind of weird, violent intimacy that chains them both to each other, which is what One Battle is drawing on when it shows these kinked up scenes of another kind of bondage. The movie gives us zero reason to think Perfidia loves this guy. She hates him, but that means that she loves how humiliating him makes her feel. Humiliating the villain feels to her totally consistent with fighting to overturn everything he stands for, so she's not troubled by it. But for the guy at the other end of the gun that she just lubed up, this produces more conflicted desires. He's both drawn to Perfidia and hates everything that she represents. And this is another idea with a long history in American literature. Like in this book, very influential in its day, called Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, written just before the Civil War. And the author, Harriet Jacobs, writes about how her master's obsession with controlling her as his slave turned into infatuation, which he confused with love. Lots of American art ever since explores how oppressors reconcile feeling both hate and obsession for the subject of their oppression by fixating on the aspect that feels most taboo. In this case, their race. And partly to justify that desire, there is a very old trope of white portrayals of black women as hypersexualized, hypnotizing men with their sexuality. Yes, this woman is supposed to be black, it's weird, as a way to explain how white men could feel attracted to women they were supposed to see as subhuman. And that kind of fearful sexualization of black women has been around for so long and even has a name, the Jezebel stereotype. And it's so ingrained that it still shows up in psych studies. Lockjaw embodies all of this. His hate for Perfidia becomes infatuation. His infatuation is forbidden, and he explains it to himself as a fetish for her race. It's his great secret that we see in this scene he can only share with one person, his enemy, Perfidia's partner, the man who we will later find out is raising Lockjaw's daughter as his own.
You like black girls? I love them. I love them.
And that partner, Pat, later going by Bob, is pulled into his own inner conflict by Perfidia. They're raising that baby.
Baby, where do you think you're going, huh?
He wants to choose family over their revolution.
You realize that we're family now, right? You don't have to do this anymore.
But she doesn't.
I put myself first and I reject your lack of originality.
Everything is in tension now. 3 characters have been brought together, and their larger conflict for America's future, plus all that history hanging over them, have left each facing some internal conflict over how to move forward. And now those internal psychological conflicts and external political conflicts are now all centered on this baby their entanglement has produced. And it ends in disaster. Each character has lost the thing they most wanted. Perfidia loses her revolution, Lockjaw loses his love, Pat loses his family.
So we're pretending to be dead folk?
That thing we just saw where the movie jumps quickly between 3 different perspectives is called cross-cutting. It's the movie's way of telling us that all 3 characters are in a similar place and that each has unfinished business that will animate the rest of the story. And the movie tells us how when it culminates in this. So many parents told me that they almost burst into tears at this simple shot and cannot explain why. But I think it feels overwhelming because you just watched, in the run-up to this moment, all the darkness of the world that produced this child now suddenly give way to this big, warm image, the lightness of what she represents now that she's grown up. And it's this shot where, alongside a few words,
16 years later, the world had changed very little.
the movie reveals what it's partly about. It's about being a parent who tried to make a better world for your child, but failed, and about how it feels to look at that child and wonder whether they'll be strong enough to navigate the mess of the world you left for them. And that might feel especially resonant in a moment in history when things are, and I think the movie wants you to draw this connection, getting worse specifically because the forces that Willa's parents were trying to fight have won in both the movie world and in our world. Let me show you what I mean. We learn that Lockjaw now runs an agency that dresses, talks, and acts an awful lot like ICE. Seems to be in total control of America and runs special forces raids on huddling immigrant kids. We see an actual real-life Homeland Security interrogator. This guy's not an actor. This is his actual job.
Sitting on plastic in a container, he still got jokes.
There are references to a white supremacist cabal that runs the country and to quasi-military dictatorship.
You know, Roy Moore, 5th Fleet Field General from the Southwest.
The 5th Fleet is a naval command in the Middle East. The implication is they came home to occupy the southwestern US. Just a little fascism Easter egg for you. Actually, that's one of a few moments that make it feel like the movie might be set like 5 years in our future, right? Like here's another. Lockjaw gets a fiction award.
Bedford Forest Medal of Honor.
Nathan Bedford Forrest was one of the founders of the KKK, implying we're in a future America where the government celebrates the Klan. We will come back to this timeline thing because it is actually really important for understanding the movie's politics. The point is, this big shot of Willa, coming when it does, hits on feelings you might not even realize you have about watching someone come of age into a world you couldn't make better. That's emotional. And it's those feelings we see weighing on another, not actually main character, Bob, her sort of dad, who I think stands in for our present and the ways we might feel about that present. Cowed, apathetic, stuck. Poor Bob is a shell.
Sort of crackling tube sound.
He's a burnout, useless.
I know how to drink and drive, honey. I know what I'm doing.
Burdened to his daughter at a time when she needs him.
I don't want to be your babysitter. I don't want to worry if you wrapped your car around a telephone pole.
This is drawing on a real thing from history.
Got to read this book called Days of Rage, which is all about ex-revolutionaries and their assimilation into the real world and how broken they were, haunted with memories and guilt.
Days of Rage is a history of 60s and 70s left-wing radical groups in the US like the Weather Underground. One of that group's flyers is actually the source of the movie's title. There are a ton of references to these groups in the movies, like their secret code.
Green Acres, Beverly Hillbillies, Hooterville Junction.
Is a line from a 1970 poem by Gil Scott-Heron that became an anthem of left-wing radical groups.
You will not be able to plug in, turn on, and cop out.
Because black people will be in the streets looking for a brighter day. The revolution will not be televised.
This is a good moment to tell you about the sponsor of this video, Storyblocks, which provides creators like me with the tools to awaken my inner Paul Thomas Anderson. Storyblocks is a giant library of footage, photography, music, sound effects, you name it, for making videos like this one look professional quality. And Storyblocks has super simple, super clear, royalty-free, and ready-for-use licensing, so you don't need a phalanx of lawyers to get going and figure out how to get everything together. And that library I mentioned is 100% human-made, handcrafted by professional artists and filmmakers, no AI, which I know viewers of this video in particular will appreciate. So to start telling better and better looking stories, go to storyblocks.com/thebiggerpicture. And for a limited time, you get 15% off any annual plan only through the link. Now let's get back to our video. And it's also drawing on what happened to those groups after the revolution fell apart. This is a documentary about one of them. It's full of stories the movie plucked out.
I found the idea of turning myself in revolting. And I had a baby.
And the thing is, these groups don't exist anymore. So why would the movie transpose them into the present day? You know, if Bomb and Team succeeded, it might read as calling for bringing their brand of activism back. The movie only shows them failing, right? Poof. And I think this makes sense if you know that this movie is adapted from a novel called Vineland. It takes place in the 1980s. And it depicts 70s radicals trying to find their way in Reagan's America that feels like the opposite of everything they'd fought for, adrift and a little dopey.
After taking as much time as he could in the bathroom, he finally got around to locating the phone and calling the local TV station to recite to them this year's press release.
And remember, like we said before, that the movie feels like it's 5 years in the future, in our future. So, okay, it's based on a book about real-life radicals 15 years after they lost their revolution. And yeah, we see our fictional revolutionaries lose and then cut ahead 15 years. And the second half of the movie takes place 5 years in the future, which means the first half took place 10 years in the past. What's the closest thing we had to radical left-wing resistance 10-ish years ago? That was from 2017. So maybe I'm off by a few years. Maybe the first part takes place in, say, 2020. Here's what I see when I put all these puzzle pieces together. That the revolutionaries in this movie are a stand-in. They're a symbol for the protest movements that swept America around 2017 to 2020. Actually, they're probably a stand-in for anyone in that era who thought the country was headed in a scary direction and tried to turn back that tide, whatever form that took. And the movie puts all of that into the stories of real 1970s radicals who lost hope and gave up, and draws on the novel about those radical struggles to stay hopeful in the conservative 1980s, because that captures how a lot of people in the present day who might have participated in those protests or resistance movements or whatever you want to call it a few years ago feel about their own failures to produce the better world that they wanted. And because those people today might identify with those burnt out over the hill radicals, they might identify with somebody like Bob.
We're talking about freedom.
He's demoralized.
When you miss it, it's gone.
Lost his edge.
Well, I don't remember the greeting code because I got a little bit high.
He's kind of given up.
I don't get mad. I don't get mad about anything anymore.
And the reason we see all this is to underscore that Bob has made a choice in the wake of his movement's failure. He's going to give up and ride it out. But refusing to fight the evil forces out in the world means now they're coming in through the door. He's gonna have to fight, but he's terrible at it. He actually does not accomplish one thing in this part of the movie, but he's not a loser. Paul Thomas Anderson has said Bob is showing, by fighting on, that there's nobility in persevering for what's right against impossible odds. And that's communicated to Bob by a character who shows up mid-movie and just steals the show.
Let's do a selfie.
Here's another trick movies use. When they want you to really take something to heart, they put it in the mouth of the most charming, likable character. That's Sergio. Bob is lost because he doesn't know how to live in a world where the bad guys won. But Sergio gives him and us an answer. Partly he conveys that answer by demonstration. His entire life is surrounding himself with family and neighbors who he helps to get by. But he also just says it.
You win some and you lose some, Bob. Bob. Get back on defense.
That's it. Accept the defeat. Don't let it define you. Go on defense. One day you'll win another. And he says another version of this later.
Tranquilo, Bobby, tranquilo. We've been laid siege for hundreds of years. You did nothing wrong. Don't get selfish.
Even what feels like total defeat, tranquilo. Stay calm, see the bigger picture. Simple, but we get a demonstration of its power in the next scene. His city falling into violence, but he's still got pals and neighbors, community. They pull two together, they keep on living and finding joy even under siege. I've reported from a bunch of places mired in dictatorship or war, and you meet people like this. Happy warrior because he has to be to survive in a time he knows is quite dark, and his moments of silliness are part of that. Dance for me, sensei.
You see the absurdity in human nature. You try to remain optimistic in the face of some of the darker parts of human nature. We all approached this story that we knew could be quite dark, but that a choice that we made was to see some of the light.
Okay, so remember that big music cue that plays at the very start of the movie with Perfidia? And then again at the big climactic scene with Willa? There's one more time it shows up. It's when we're following the movie's villain, Colonel Lockjaw, who represents, like a lot of the best villains, some uncomfortable truths about us as a society. Let's start with that bit of repeating music. It comes when he meets the leaders of the weird, ultra-racist cult that secretly runs the government.
Our aim and your aim is the same. To find dangerous lunatics, haters, and punk trash, and stop them.
Sorry, time out. That's Jim Downey. He's a famous comedy writer, mostly for Saturday Night Live. His forays in front of the camera are rare, but legendary.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
I'm talking about Jeff Epstein, the New York financier.
Anyway, back to the scene. The fascism Illuminati recruit Lockjaw.
Do you submit yourself?
He's delirious. This is everything he ever dreamed of. But then that score comes back in. The music is telling us that this is a dark moment, just like the other two times we heard it, because the movie is giving us clues to something Lockjaw doesn't know. This group will never accept him. They made him sneak in the back of the party. They openly laugh at him.
Okay.
This is a tragic character, and the music draws a parallel in your mind across the 3 times you hear it. Which draws a parallel between these 3 characters. It's saying they're all up against the same antagonist. And what is that one unified, larger antagonist? In a literal sense, you could say that it's the innermost fascistic elite who are behind each of these things these characters are facing in these moments. For Perfidia, it's the detention camp. For Lockjaw, it's that elite cabal. For Willa, it's Lockjaw himself. But I think what the movie is really saying is that all of these things represent the same larger, darker truth about what America is, or at least one side of America. The real antagonist isn't some weird guy in a room ranting about
lunatics, haters, and punk trash.
It's the knowledge that all this cruelty and darkness comes from within us as a society. That's the big scary thing they're all facing when the music swells like that. But anyway, the tragedy of Lockjaw is that he thinks that that antagonist is his friend.
The fragility that he brought to what would otherwise be an obvious choice by maybe some other actors to make him purely menacing. I just thought he was so incredibly pathetic and almost sympathetic at times.
And his frustration in his own skin. It's a testament to Sean that from time to time there would be weird subsects of the crew that would say, I hate to admit this, but I'm Team Lockjaw. I don't know what it is.
The villain who's also a victim, it's not new, but usually the villain is a victim of society, like Killmonger in Black Panther.
Because they knew death was better than bondage.
And the point of villains like that is to call attention to the greater societal harm that turned them into a villain. With Lockjaw, he's been brought into a worldview that tells him to lock up the woman he loves, to sacrifice his own daughter.
I have a higher calling.
It's filled him with weird, confused racial obsessions.
I love her.
And with insecurity about his masculinity.
I'm not gay, if that's what you're saying.
But he's devoted to that worldview because he thinks if he stays true to it, it will allow him to join an elite he worships but will never really have him, and who in the end discard him like trash. We're not supposed to feel sad for Lockjaw, so much as understand that his brutality is all on behalf of this big lie that's been sold to him, that gets him to destroy his own soul. He and what he represents in our culture, you can decide for yourself what that is meant to seem pathetic.
Oh, Mommy, thank you, sir.
But he's also the foil against which our main character, Willa, who represents, and this is common for coming-of-age stories, our future. Who we'll collectively become, what challenges we'll face. And for Willa, that means confronting some big truths about her past, specifically her parents. Truths that have been hidden from her.
Dad ever mention Steve Lockjaw?
He's the one who killed my mom.
And she's beginning to figure that out.
My dad told me she was a hero.
That's the crisis that comes to a head when she meets Lockjaw. What she's really confronting is the truth about herself. This grotesque man she grew up hating and fearing is also half of her own DNA. And this is a twist that might feel familiar because it comes straight out of one of the biggest artistic influences on this movie. Maybe the most famous twist in movie history.
No, I am your father.
But it's not just a plot twist, right? It's about Luke's inner conflict on learning he has both good and evil within him.
And your journey towards the dark side will be complete.
And that he can't defeat evil in the world until he defeats it within himself. Willa isn't tempted by the dark side, but remember, she is a stand-in for us, figuring out who we are and how to go forward. And yeah, looking at the news, this is a moment when we are facing some hard truths about who we really are, what's in our national DNA. Willa and Lockjaw even have a big argument about, on the surface, Perfidia, the person who connects them.
I loved her, in case you were wondering.
But it's really over how they feel about their little family.
She was a rat.
She was a warrior, a righteous warrior of freedom.
She was a rat.
This is the whole movie here. They're grappling with how their family, which remember is a stand-in for America itself, can be a product of both what Perfidia represents, hope and revolution, and of what Lockjaw represents, hate and cruelty. It's a terrible contradiction that neither of them can tolerate. Willa responds by rejecting both parents, and Lockjaw responds by trying to have the living evidence of that family erased. But she escapes, and like any coming-of-age story, sets out on a journey on her own to find her way in the world. Which brings us to the big ending, out on the road. Again, classic coming of age. She confronts the dangers of the world, symbolizing her arrival at adulthood. She triumphs. But it's not a triumphant moment. She is anguished.
Yeah, it's funny because audiences, I suppose as they should, they applaud when Willa shoots, but it's followed by this like really primal scream on her part, and you feel the audience go quiet.
She's still left with that core crisis from the scene we talked about at the start of the video. This terrible truth that she is inheriting a world and an identity down to her DNA shaped by the forces of evil having won. Which is why I think the real ending isn't her shooting the bad guy. It's what happens right after that when Bob shows up. Both times I saw this in theaters, you could feel every person in that room holding their breath. This is a confrontation just as emotionally charged as Will is with Lockjaw, except now it's between two people who love each other. But she doesn't really know who he is anymore.
Green Acres, Beverly Hillbillies, and Hooterville Junction!
No, baby, it's me.
He lied to her about Lockjaw, about her mom, about what the world is. She thought her parents were heroes, but now she's refighting their battles even within herself.
Who are you?
This is the line of the movie. Who are you if you're not really my dad? Who are you if you're not the person who fought fascism to make the world safe and better? You have to understand that even though, yeah, Willa is the protagonist, the author of the story sees himself in Bob. This is not a movie made by young people expressing their anger at the previous generation. It's the voice of people his age, my age, somewhere in that range, reckoning with the world we're going to pass on. And that comes through if you hear about how the ending was originally written.
Finale went a number of different ways in the script. And only after shooting it once, first Bob was going to turn up and maybe get a lucky shot or fall down and kill somebody for her or something like that. None of that quite felt right.
But the answer to all of these swirling questions for Willa and for Bob turns out to be just a few words.
It's your dad! Look at me. It's okay.
This is when your decisions from your past are passed on to her. This is the next generation of your daughter dealing with the violence of your past, having killed somebody and then realizing that she's in shock and doesn't know who you are. His heroic moment is saying, it's me, I'm your father.
I'm your dad.
You know, I'm your dad. It felt realistic, it felt true.
It's the movie telling Willa and us, yeah, Lockjaw's cruelty is her heritage. Perfidia's betrayal is her heritage, but Bob's goodness is still something she can choose for herself and her future. She can choose him as her dad. Bob offering her that and her accepting, that's the big climax of the movie. So, okay, what's it all about? Look, this movie is an allegory, a story with a larger meaning, about America under Trump. It just is. The filmmakers don't want to say that because it would reduce the movie down to a partisan slogan, and then nobody would be able to hear the more complicated things it's saying. But Paul Thomas Anderson got close in, as far as I can tell, in exactly one interview with the Los Angeles Times. He said, the biggest mistake I could make in a story like this is to put politics up on the front. He did say the F word, yeah, it is about fascism and people doing bad stuff to each other. But he also said, when he brought up what's happening right now, that what's worse is that it's not going away. This has all happened before, and it'll all happen again. It's something more enduring within America than any one president or event, which speaks to that line from Sergio.
Tranquilo, Bobby, tranquilo. We've been laid siege for hundreds of years.
How do you resist the urge to give up like Bob does when defeat feels total? How do you avoid facing a terrible choice like Perfidia between your values and your survival? What can you even hope for when the Lockjaws of the world aren't just some passing antagonist, but part of our national DNA? These are the questions Bob and Willa are left with at the end, and Bob answers by giving Willa a letter from her mother.
Okay, I'm gonna share this with you, and if you wanna see it, you can see it.
Not because it has the solution for their problems or how to save the world, but because it'll give her the truth. The letter we hear actually borrows a few lines from a real letter that a real member of one of those 70s radical groups sent her dad from hiding in 1977, including this line.
Hello from the other side of the shadows.
But it's the last lines of that letter that are, I think, a message as much to us as to Willa.
Will you try and change the world like I did? We failed. But maybe you will not. Maybe you will be the one who puts the world right.
When I look at everything this movie has to say about who we are, how we got here, the failure of the movie's heroes, who I am sure are meant to stand in for the collective failure of anyone who wanted a better world, I don't think it's telling us that, yeah, you, Willa, the next generation, whoever is gonna smash fascism once and for all, never gives us the slightest reassurance that we will succeed where her parents fail, or that the forces of evil, who we never see at the slightest risk, will slow their advance. And we want to believe that life is Star Wars, and some hero will vanquish the dark side for us, but not here. Still, the movie isn't resigned. Willa sees her parents for who they are and embraces the parts of her inheritance that give her something to fight for. Bob over Lockjaw as her dad, Perfidia's idealism over her betrayal. It's telling us that we have to recognize our own inheritance as a society for what it is, for who we are, but we're not condemned to that. Again, it's a big hint that the movie makes Sergio the most likable character. He knows he's on defense, but he is fighting on, joyfully. And so is Willa, because they see that, and the movie sees that, as valuable in itself, however impossible the odds.